Kathleen, take us through what would be like right now in the White House, between the West Wing and the executive residence. What do they prepare for?
Well, I think that there's been a sense out there that this could happen for months. And so I'm sure we know that they do have a plan in place for that. And we do know from the president's position that they plan to, both the president and the first lady plan to stay at home during their convalescence and, essentially do what many Americans have done, which is self-isolate while they're sick and wait to get better. Trump has already canceled his campaign events for the day. I would expect that to continue probably for several days. And, I think that certainly there's not going to be a lot of movement probably between the residents and the West Wing at this stage. I would expect the president and the first lady would stay most likely in the residence, but they've not given out that level of detail.
And what about leading the country, Kathleen? What happens next? Does Trump give a lot of responsibilities to Vice President Pence?
Well, at this stage, they're saying, the statement from the White House's position is saying quite clearly that the president intends to, keep up all of his presidential duties, just doing them from the White House. And so, it's important to remember that in March and April, the president really didn't leave the White House complex that much. And so there is some precedent for him, carrying out his duties from there. So there's not any sense at all that there's going to be any kind of, official transfer of power or something like that. But I would imagine that at least when it comes to campaigning, he's going to have to rely more on surrogates and Mike Pence, at least for the next couple of weeks while he gets better.
6:15 a.m. in the city of London. U.S. equity futures taking big leg lower this morning. S&P 500 mini futures down 1 4/10%. As we have this news, Kathleen, that President Donald Trump and his wife, Melania Trump, the First Lady, both test positive for COVID-19. Kathleen, I have to ask, we are 32 days away from this election. What does this mean for the election?
Well, it brings into we're in really unprecedented waters here. It was already going to be an unprecedented election in the sense that, the U.S. is in the midst of this global pandemic while it's voting on its president. Now to have, that president, that sitting incumbent president, test positive just a month before the election, I think raises some additional concerns about the president's response to the virus. We already know that, over the summer, his rally in Tulsa was later described as, potentially a super spreader type of event. The president has already been subjected to a lot of criticism that he's not taken the virus seriously enough, that he's not put in proper precautions. And so I think that this certainly adds to that criticism. But again, it also just adds to the uncertainty. The idea that there could be a threat to the president's health this close to the election just creates even more uncertainty, for the U.S. and for markets.
Certainly more uncertainty. We see that playing out. It's shaping up to really be a messy Friday, given this news. And you could see that in the futures over in the United States. Kathleen, could this move voters, though? Many people say that pretty much every American has made up their minds. We already see people actually starting to vote already. But could this change people's mind about voting, who they vote for on November 3rd?
Well, I think you're right in saying that, this election is distinct in that, large numbers of Americans have already voted. More than 1 million Americans, we knew at the beginning of the week, had already returned their ballots. That's a much higher number than in past elections. So obviously those people's votes aren't going to be affected. We also know that just from polling, the number of undecided voters is very low compared to past elections. So, I don't think necessarily in those terms there's not a whole lot that can happen that can change people's minds, but this is certainly a very, large-scale event, and it, brings fresh attention to an issue that has been a real liability for the president when it comes to politics, and that's his handling the coronavirus. So I think that, it's important to note that, there's not a lot that can change people's minds, but this is the type of large-scale event that really could swing the needle a bit.